My wife walked into the kitchen and froze. She gasped. "You didn't leave?" I took a sip of my whiskey and replied, "The trip is cancelled." Then I told her to lift her dress. That was the moment her entire world crumbled, and the truth I had been hiding finally came out. You think you know the person you sleep next to? Think again. Sometimes, the sweetest smiles hide the sharpest daggers. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and the ultimate payback, make sure you subscribe to Inspiration Seeker, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Now, let me tell you how I dismantled my own life, to save it. 2 hours later, I was standing at the side door of my own garage. The Uber had dropped me off a block away to avoid alerting the neighbors, or Sarah. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key. Sarah thought I had lost this key 3 years ago during a ski trip in Aspen. She believed the only way into the house was through the smart lock on the front door, which logged every entry to her phone. She was wrong. I turned the manual lock slowly. The mechanism clicked, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the afternoon, but the heavy door swung open without a creak. I had oiled the hinges 2 days ago specifically for this moment. Stepping inside, the atmosphere of the house felt instantly wrong. It didn't smell like laundry or dinner cooking. The air was thick with the scent of midnight rose, an expensive, heavy perfume she claimed was too overpowering for daily wear. It was the scent of seduction. The fact that she had sprayed it liberally the moment I left was a slap in the face, confirming everything Earl had told me. I moved through the hallway like a ghost, my footsteps silent on the hardwood. I bypassed the living room and went straight to the home office. There they were, sitting on the mahogany desk, charging side by side like innocent appliances. Her personal laptop and the 2 prepaid burner phones Earl had identified. These weren't just electronics, they were the vaults containing her secrets, her plans, and her betrayal. I didn't hesitate. I gathered them all up in one swoop. I walked over to the heavy-duty wall safe hidden behind the landscape painting in the corridor. I punched in the code, a code only I knew, and placed her digital life inside the steel box. Click. I spun the dial. Locked. Now, the trap was set. I walked into the spacious kitchen, the heart of our home. The house was dead quiet. Sarah was likely upstairs, finishing her preparations, preening herself for Bill. I didn't turn on the lights. I preferred the shadows. I reached for the crystal decanter and poured myself 2 fingers of aged bourbon. No ice. I wanted the burn. I sat on the stool at the kitchen island, facing the hallway entrance, and took a slow sip. The liquid warmed my chest, settling my nerves into a cold, hard resolve. I checked my watch. She would be coming down any minute now to wait for him. I just sat there in the dark, glass in hand, waiting for the show to begin. The suitcase by the door was packed with clothes I had no intention of wearing. I stood in the foyer of the house I had designed with my own hands, watching Sarah descend the stairs. She looked beautiful, of course. She always did. She was wearing that oversized cashmere sweater she knew I liked, projecting the image of the perfect, supportive wife sending her husband off on a crucial business trip to Denver. "Do you have your passport? Your charger?" she asked, adjusting my collar. Her voice was soft, concerned. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed her. But I did know better. I knew that her concern wasn't about my comfort, it was about ensuring I was actually leaving. I looked her in the eyes, searching for a trace of the woman I married 10 years ago. Instead, I saw a subtle twitch in her left eyelid, a nervous tick she only got when she was lying. Her palms, usually cool, felt clammy against my neck. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking through me, her eyes darting momentarily to the grandfather clock in the hallway. She was counting down the seconds. Not until I returned, but until I was gone. "I'll miss you, Steve," she said, leaning in for a kiss. It was quick, dry, and felt like a betrayal in itself. "I'll be back before you know it," I replied, the double meaning heavy on my tongue, though she completely missed it. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase, the leather grip feeling cold in my hand. I walked out the front door, the heavy oak slamming shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. The Uber was waiting in the driveway. I tossed my bag in the trunk and slid into the back seat. As the car rolled down the long driveway, I didn't look back at the house. I knew she was probably already texting him. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Heading to O'Hare Airport, right, sir?" I watched my neighborhood fade into the distance, the facade of my happy suburban life peeling away with every mile. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and checked the tracking app one last time. The dot was stationary at my office. He was waiting, too. "No," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Change of plans. Take me to 54th Street. I have a meeting with a man named Earl." I didn't have to wait long. The silence of the house was broken by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of heels on the stairs. It wasn't the hurried pace of a busy mother. It was the confident strut of a woman expecting a night of pleasure. She was humming a soft melody, a tune I hadn't heard her sing in years. It made my stomach turn, realizing her happiness was directly tied to my absence. She breezed into the kitchen, the silk of her dress rustling against her skin. In her hand, she held a bottle of wine, my 1998 Cabernet, a vintage I had been saving for our 10th anniversary. She didn't even look into the darkroom before her hand slapped the wall switch. Click. The overhead LEDs flooded the room with blinding white light. She spun around to grab a corkscrew and then, she froze. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like she'd seen a ghost. The bottle of wine wobbled in her grip, slipping through her sweat-slicked fingers before she frantically caught it against her hip, gasping for air. "Steve!" she choked out, her eyes bulging. You didn't leave. I didn't move. I just sat there on the stool, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. The sound of the iceless bourbon hitting the sides of the crystal was the only noise in the room. I took a slow sip, holding her gaze until she looked away. "The trip is cancelled," I said. My voice was low, steady, completely devoid of the warmth she was used to. Panic didn't set in immediately. Confusion came first. Her eyes darted to the counter where she had left her phone earlier. Then to the empty spot on the desk where her laptop usually sat. She patted her pockets frantically. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just surprised, she was disconnected. "Where is my phone?" she demanded, her voice pitching up an octave. "And my laptop?" "They were right here." "In the safe," I replied, pointing calmly toward the hidden panel in the hallway. "And you know the drill. Once that door is shut, it doesn't open without my biometrics." She took a step back, her breathing shallow. She knew she was cornered, but she didn't know how deep the hole was yet. I stood up slowly, placing my glass on the counter with a deliberate thud. "Now," I said, locking eyes with her. "Lift your dress." Her jaw dropped. For a second, the kitchen was so silent you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Sarah looked at me with a mix of confusion and absolute terror, her hands clutching the fabric of her dress like a shield. "Are you kidding me, Steve?" she stammered, her voice trembling and cracking on my name. She tried to laugh, a desperate, hollow sound meant to diffuse the tension, but it died in her throat when she saw the look on my face. "I'm your wife. What is wrong with you? You're acting crazy." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. "I'm not asking again, Sarah. Either you do it yourself, or I will do it for you. Make your choice." She searched my eyes for any sign of the pushover husband she had manipulated for years, the man who blindly signed checks and believed her late-night excuses. But that man was gone. He died the moment I saw the bank transfers. Upon realizing there was no way out, her face turned a sickly shade of pale. Her defiance crumbled into submission. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached down. She hesitated, biting her lip, tears welling up in her eyes, not tears of remorse, but tears of humiliation. She lifted the hem of her elegant evening dress, inch by inch, until the truth was exposed for both of us to see. Underneath, she wasn't wearing the comfortable cotton pajamas she usually wore around me on a Tuesday night. She wasn't wearing the simple underwear she packed for our vacations. She was wearing a scandalously expensive set of red silk lingerie, trimmed with black lace. It was intricate, provocative, and brand new. I stared at it, feeling a cold fire in my gut. I recognized it immediately. Not because I had bought it for her, but because 3 days ago, I had found the crumpled receipt for this exact item in the wastebasket of my business partner's office. I knew it, I whispered, the words slicing through the air like a knife. I looked from the silk back up to her weeping eyes. You're not dressed for bed, Sarah. You're dressed for him. Before she could even attempt to stammer out a lie, the silence of the house was shattered. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by 3 sharp raps on the wood. It wasn't the polite knock of a delivery driver or a neighbor borrowing sugar. It was the rhythmic, confident knock of a man who didn't just feel welcome, he felt entitled to what was inside. I checked my watch. 7:30 p.m. on the dot. Punctual, I muttered, a dark smirk playing on my lips. That must be Bill. Sarah froze, her face a mask of pure horror. She looked at the door, then back at me, her eyes pleading for a mercy I no longer possessed. Steve, please. She whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Go, I commanded, my voice leaving no room for argument. Answer the door. And Sarah, act normal. If you scream, if you try to warn him, I promise you, the police will be the least of your worries. She wiped her face frantically, trying to compose herself, shaking like a leaf in a storm. I moved into the shadows of the hallway, grabbing the heavy wooden baseball bat I had positioned there earlier. I didn't plan to use it, not if I didn't have to, but I needed them to know I was the one holding the power now. Sarah unlocked the door and swung it open. There he was. Bill. My business partner of 15 years. The man I played golf with every Sunday. The man who was the godfather to our non-existent children. He was standing there in a sharp blazer, holding a massive bouquet of red roses and a smug grin plastered across his face. Baby! He shouted enthusiastically, stepping across the threshold without waiting for an invitation. Is the coast clear? Did the boring husband finally take off? He stopped dead mid-sentence. His eyes went wide as he looked past Sarah's trembling shoulder and saw me stepping out of the shadows, the baseball bat resting casually on my shoulder. The bouquet of roses dropped from his hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a wax figure. Hey Bill, I said, my voice calm and terrifyingly polite. You're early for the meeting. I didn't swing the bat. I didn't have to. The sheer weight of my presence and the sudden collapse of their carefully constructed reality was enough to paralyze them both. Bill looked like he was about to vomit, and Sarah was shaking so hard I could hear her jewelry rattling. Living room. Table. Now. I ordered, gesturing with the handle of the bat. They obeyed like frightened children, shuffling into the dining room and taking seats opposite each other. I sat at the head of the table, placing the bat on the floor and replacing it with a thick manila folder I had pulled from my jacket. Since the whole gang is here, I said, opening the folder with a deliberate slowness that made Bill flinch, I figured we should skip the pleasantries and get right down to the quarterly review. I slid a stack of glossy 8 by 10 photographs across the polished mahogany table. They fanned out perfectly. The first few were standard infidelity clichés, grainy shots of them kissing in a hotel lobby, holding hands at a bistro in the city. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. But I wasn't interested in their romance. I was interested in their math. The affair is tacky, Bill. Really? I expected better from you, I said, my eyes boring into his. But the embezzlement. That's just sloppy. I pulled out the second set of documents, printouts of wire transfers. Thick, black lines highlighted the transactions. You two didn't just want to be together. You wanted to be rich. You've been siphoning funds from our joint construction firm for 6 months. Vendor payments to shell companies that don't exist. Consulting fees for projects we never bid on. Bill's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He recognized the bank codes. I know about the account in the Cayman Islands, I continued, dropping the final bombshell. And I know about the one-way tickets you booked for next Tuesday. You weren't just planning to leave me, Sarah. You were planning to bankrupt me. You were going to leave me with nothing but the company debt while you two sipped Mai Tais on a beach, living off my hard work. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The air in the room felt charged with electricity. They realized this wasn't a jealous husband ranting, this was a forensic audit. Bill opened his mouth, looking like a fish gasping for air on dry land. Steve, look. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. We were just moving the money to protect the assets from. Save it, I snapped, the command echoing off the walls. I don't want to hear your voice unless you're pleading guilty. I stood up and walked over to the wall safe. Sarah watched me with wide, wet eyes as I retrieved her sleek silver laptop. She flinched when I set it down on the coffee table. I flipped the lid open. The screen glowed to life, asking for a password. Let me guess, I said, looking at her over the top of the screen. My birthday? No, that would be too sentimental. Your birthday? Bingo. I typed in the digits. The desktop loaded instantly. I didn't just keep it on the small screen though. I grabbed the HDMI cable connected to our 65-inch television and plugged it in. The massive screen flickered, and suddenly, their secret life was broadcast in high definition for everyone to see. Technically, this is an invasion of privacy, Bill mumbled, trying to regain some shred of ground. Technically, I corrected him, scrolling through her inbox, this is company property. And since you used this laptop to conspire to commit fraud, it's evidence. I pulled up the emails first. There were drafts of resignation letters they planned to send the day after their flight. Then, the flight confirmations, first class, one way to Grand Cayman. But the real dagger was the text thread between them. I clicked on it, and the messages scrolled down the screen. Bill, he has no idea. The idiot thinks the audit is next month. Sarah, I can't wait to be done with him. He's so boring. Just make sure the transfer clears before Friday. I paused the screen on that last message. You see, I said, turning to face them. I knew about the affair weeks ago, but I couldn't move on you yet. I needed you to execute the final transfer. I needed you to think I was gone so you would get sloppy and move the big money. My business trip wasn't an escape, Bill. It was the green light you were waiting for. And you ran right through it. Bill stared at the screen, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at me with a mix of hatred and confusion. You can't prove intent, he spat out, trying to sound like the tough negotiator he pretended to be in boardrooms. We can claim it was a clerical error, a mismanagement of funds. We'll pay it back. You can't touch my personal assets. I let out a dry, dark laugh. It echoed off the high ceilings. You always underestimated me, Bill. You thought because I was quiet, I was blind. You forgot that while you were out schmoozing clients and sleeping with my wife, I was the one who wrote our original incorporation papers. I designed the bylaws of our company just like I design my skyscrapers, with a failsafe. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. At 9 a.m. this morning, while you were buying those roses, my attorney, Sue, was walking into a judge's chambers. She triggered the emergency embezzlement clause in our partnership agreement. It's a little paragraph on page 42 you probably never bothered to read. Bill frantically pulled his phone out of his pocket. His fingers trembled as he tapped on his banking app. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time. What is this? He whispered, staring at his screen. Access denied. It's called an asset freeze, Bill, I explained, savoring the moment. Because of the evidence Earl collected, the photos, the wire trails, the burner phones, Sue was able to get an emergency injunction. Your accounts are frozen. Sarah's access to our joint funds was revoked an hour ago. Your credit cards declined. Your savings locked. Sarah let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. But the transfer, she wailed, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. The millions, the notification said it went through. Oh, the money moved all right, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. But it didn't go to your offshore shell company in the Caymans. We flagged the transfer. That money is currently sitting in a federal escrow account controlled by the FBI as evidence of grand larceny. You aren't rich, Sarah. You're destitute. And you, Bill, you're not retiring. You're broke. The color in the room shifted before the sound even registered. Flashes of red and blue light began to dance across the kitchen cabinets, cutting through the tension like a strobe light. Then came the wail, the distant, rising scream of sirens turning onto our street. It grew louder with every second, drowning out the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of their hearts. Sarah scrambled off her chair, falling to her knees on the hard tile. She didn't run, she crawled toward me, clutching the leg of my trousers with a grip so tight her knuckles turned white. Steve, stop them! She screamed, her voice shredding with hysteria. Please. It was a mistake. He made me do it. I was confused. I still love you. Don't let them take me. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity. No anger. Just the cold detachment of watching a stranger beg. I gently but firmly shook my leg free from her grasp and took a step back. Bill, on the other hand, didn't beg. He panicked. He heard the heavy car doors slamming outside and the sound of boots pounding up the driveway. His eyes darted to the back door, the sliding glass patio door that led to the backyard and the woods beyond. Screw this, he yelled, shoving his chair backward so hard it tipped over. He bolted for the glass, his hand reaching for the latch. He yanked on the handle. It didn't budge. He pulled again, harder, slamming his shoulder against the frame. It's a double-cylinder deadbolt, Bill, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. I installed it last weekend. And I have the only key. Before he could look for something to break the glass with, the front door, which Sarah had left unlocked, burst open. Police. Hands where I can see them. Now. Uniformed officers swarmed the hallway, weapons drawn but lowered. Behind them walked Detective Miller, a man Sue had briefed extensively an hour ago. He looked around the room, saw the bat on the floor, the open laptop, and the two terrified suspects. Bill Henderson? Sarah Miller. The detective barked. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny. Bill was slammed against the counter, the cold steel of handcuffs clicking around his wrists before he could utter another word. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably as an officer pulled her hands behind her back. As they were marched out the front door, past the neighbors who had gathered on their lawns to watch the spectacle, I stood in the doorway, sipping the last of my bourbon. Bill wouldn't look at me. But Sarah did. She looked back one last time, her eyes pleading for a savior that wasn't there. I just raised my glass in a silent toast. Goodbye. 6 months later. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of silence now. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets and lies. It's the peaceful silence of a fresh start. I'm sitting on the back patio, the early morning sun warming the stone beneath my feet. The air smells like fresh coffee and pine, finally purged of that cloying midnight rose perfume that used to linger in every hallway. On the glass table in front of me lies a thick envelope that arrived via courier this morning. I don't even have to open it to know what it says, but I do anyway. Decree of dissolution of marriage. Finalized. I run my thumb over the embossed seal. It's over. My attorney, Sue, was ruthless. She didn't just win, she conquered. Because of the undeniable mountain of evidence Earl and I compiled, the plea deals were less than favorable for them. Bill got 10 years for corporate fraud and embezzlement. The last I heard, he was working in the prison laundry, a far cry from the corner office he tried to steal. And Sarah, she got 8 years. She sent me a letter last week, a long, rambling handwritten note begging for forgiveness, blaming Bill for corrupting her. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I fed it directly into the shredder. It wasn't easy getting here. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Watching the woman I loved and the friend I trusted get hauled away in handcuffs left a scar. I had to rebuild the company's reputation, hire a new team, and learn to live in this big house alone. But as I look out at the garden, watching the leaves turn gold with the autumn chill, I realize something important. I didn't lose my wife. I didn't lose my best friend. I lost 2 parasites who were slowly bleeding me dry. I take a sip of my coffee, looking at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in years, I don't wonder what she's thinking. I don't wonder who she's texting. I just feel free. The trip to Denver was fake. The trap was real. And in the end, the trash took itself out. And that is how I turned the worst night of my life into my greatest victory. It's a reminder that sometimes, you have to play the villain in their story to be the hero in your own. What do you think? Did Steve go too far, or did Sarah and Bill get exactly what they deserved? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, Team Steve if you think justice was served, or too harsh if you think he went overboard. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe to Inspiration Seeker for more stories about karma, betrayal, and redemption. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth always comes out in the wash.